My name is Leigh Callahan, and I am 32 years old. I want to tell you what happened on the night of February 11th, because I have spent 4 months trying to figure out how to say it out loud, and I think the only way through it is to just start at the beginning. It was a Saturday. My husband and I had been at a friend's birthday dinner the weekend before, and I had noticed a strange tightness in my chest during dessert. Something I brushed off as anxiety because I had been under a lot of stress at work. But by Saturday evening, that tightness had turned into something I had never felt before. A pressure so deep and so specific that it felt like someone had reached into my chest cavity and was squeezing. Not my heart exactly. More like everything around it. I was in the kitchen making tea when it hit me, and I had to grab the edge of the counter with both hands just to stay upright. I told myself it was nothing. I am not someone who panics. I am the kind of person who finishes her to-do list before going to the doctor. Which is not something I am proud of, but it is honest. I sat down on the kitchen floor and waited for it to pass. It did not pass. It got worse, and then it got so much worse that I started shaking, and the shaking scared me more than the pain did because I could not make it stop. I called my husband. He did not answer. I called again. Still nothing. I knew where he was. He was at a playoff watch party at his college friend's house about 20 minutes away. I had declined the invitations because I had a headache earlier in the day. I texted him, "Something is wrong, please call me." The message showed delivered. I waited 2 minutes. Nothing. I called a third time, fourth time. I sent another text. "I think I need help. Are you seeing this?" My phone said the messages were read. He did not call back. By the time I had tried to reach him 9 times across calls and texts, I was on the floor again, this time not by choice. My left arm had started to go numb, which is the thing they tell you about in health class, the thing you are supposed to recognize. I recognized it. That recognition was its own kind of terror. I remember looking at the refrigerator from the floor and thinking, absurdly, that I had not finished the leftovers in there and they were going to go bad. The mind does strange things when the body is shutting down. I do not know exactly what made me stop calling my husband and call 911 instead. I think some part of my brain finally overrode the part that was still hoping he would pick up. The dispatcher was calm and clear and told me to stay on the line and to unlock my front door if I could get there. I could not get there standing, so I crawled. That is not a figure of speech. I dragged myself across my own kitchen floor to the front hallway and reached up to flip the deadbolt, and then I lay down on the entry rug and waited. The paramedics arrived in under 8 minutes. I know this because the dispatcher told me when I could hear the sirens. 8 minutes. I had been trying to reach my husband for 22. In the ambulance, one of the paramedics kept talking to me, asking me my name, my age, whether I had any allergies, whether I had a history of cardiac events. I said no to all of it. I was 32 years old, and I ran 3 days a week, and I did not have a history of anything, except maybe being too stubborn to ask for help. She squeezed my hand at one point and said, "You did the right thing calling us. You did good." I remember that. I held on to that sentence the entire way to the hospital. What the doctors found was a spontaneous coronary artery dissection. It is rare, more common in women than people realize, and it does not care how healthy you are or how young you are or how little family history you have. A tear in the wall of a coronary artery. My body had been quietly tearing for days, maybe longer, and I had been filing it under stress. I had emergency surgery that night. The procedure was called a percutaneous coronary intervention. They went in and placed a stent. I was under for several hours. I woke up in the cardiac ICU at 4:17 in the morning, and the first thing I saw when I could focus was a nurse checking the monitors beside my bed. The second thing I saw was that the chair in the corner was empty. I asked where my husband was. The nurse, her name was Sandra, and she had a small silver cross at her collarbone that I noticed because I was looking everywhere except at her face. She did not answer right away. She adjusted something on the IV stand, and then she looked at me directly and said, "Your emergency contact was notified when you were admitted. I'll let the attending know you're awake." She did not say he was there. She did not say he was on his way. I had been in emergency cardiac surgery for hours, and the chair in the corner was empty. The attending came in, a cardiologist named Dr. Park, who had the manner of someone who had delivered difficult news enough times that she knew exactly how much space to give a patient before saying the hard thing. She explained the procedure, explained the stent, explained the recovery protocol. She was thorough and patient, and I could tell she was also working up to something. When she finished the medical overview, she folded her hands in her lap and she said, "I want you to know that we had some challenges on the administrative side tonight. There was a delay in your paperwork being processed because of a coverage question with your insurance. Someone resolved it, and your care was not interrupted, but I wanted you to be aware. I asked what kind of delay. She said there had been a question about whether a particular element of the procedure fell under my current plan's pre-authorization requirements. She said the billing office had flagged it at an unusual hour, and that it had been handled by someone who intervened with the department directly. I did not understand what she was describing. I had just woken up from cardiac surgery. My brain was moving through fog. She seemed to sense that, because she stopped explaining the administrative part, and she said, "There's someone in the waiting room who has been here since about an hour after you were admitted. He's not family, but he asked to be notified when you were awake. He said you could tell him to leave, and he would, no questions asked." I asked who it was. She said his name was Ed Baxter. I had no idea who Ed Baxter was. He came in a few minutes after the attending left. I had expected. I do not know what I had expected. Someone dramatic. Someone who looked like they had a reason to be there. Ed Baxter looked like he was on his way home from running a hardware store. He was probably 60, heavy-set in a comfortable way, wearing a green fleece jacket and work boots that still had a little dried mud on them. He had the kind of face that has been outside in all weather for many years. He stood in the doorway of my hospital room like he was checking whether it was okay to come in, and I waved him in because I did not know what else to do. He sat down in the chair beside my bed, the empty chair, and he introduced himself. He said he was a contractor, that he had been at the hospital earlier that evening, visiting a former client of his who was recovering from hip surgery on another floor. He said he had been in the lobby on his way out when he overheard a commotion near the emergency check-in desk. He said a man had come in asking about me. He said the man, my husband, had spoken to the front desk staff and then, when he was told I was in surgery and it would be several hours, had asked if there was a waiting room with a TV because there was a game on. Ed stopped there for a second. He looked at his hand. He said he almost left. He said it was not his business, and he knew that. But something about the way the front desk receptionist looked after my husband walked toward the waiting room. Something about that expression made him pause. He went to the receptionist himself and he asked quietly whether the patient in cardiac surgery had anyone staying with her. The receptionist could not tell him specifics, but she told him that surgery of this nature could take several hours, and that family members were encouraged to remain on site in case decisions needed to be made. Ed sat down in the waiting room. He said the game was on the television in the corner, and my husband was watching it. He said he sat 2 seats away and did not introduce himself. He just waited. At some point in the second hour, my husband got up, got a cup of coffee from the vending area, came back, finished it, and then picked up his jacket and left. Ed said he watched him sign out at the front desk at 12:43 in the morning. I had been on the table since approximately 9:15. Ed stayed. He stayed because, and this is the part he said with the least ceremony, like it was simply the obvious thing, he said, "I've got a daughter about your age." I just couldn't walk out of a building, knowing somebody's kid was in there alone. While he was waiting, he had gone to the billing desk when it opened its after-hours window and asked whether there were any administrative holds on my file that could affect the care being provided. He had overheard the word authorization used by a staff member, and it had concerned him. When the billing coordinator explained the insurance flag, he asked what it would cost to clear it. He paid it. He put it on his card, and he told them to make sure it did not interrupt anything. He was not a wealthy man. I do not know this for a fact, but I know it the way you know certain things. He was a contractor in work boots who had been visiting a former client out of loyalty. He was not someone with money to spare. He paid my hospital billing gap at midnight in a cardiac ward waiting room because he did not want a stranger's care delayed. I started crying. Not politely, not quietly, the kind of crying that your body does when it has been holding something enormous and finally finds permission to put it down. Ed did not try to make it stop. He sat there in his green fleece jacket with his muddy work boots, and he let me cry, and when I eventually ran out of it, he handed me a folded-over napkin from his jacket pocket, the fast food kind, which made me laugh through the last of the tears, and he smiled a little and said, "It's clean." My husband arrived at the hospital the next morning at 10. He had texted me at 8:47, just saw the update from the hospital. "OMG babe, are you okay? I'm coming now." The 9 calls and the read messages were not mentioned. He came in carrying a coffee from the drive-thru and he kissed me on the forehead and said, "You scared me to death." I watched him look around the room. He noticed the flower arrangement on the window ledge. Ed had left it before he went home. A small thing from the hospital gift shop, yellow daisies. My husband asked who sent the flowers. I told him a man named Ed Baxter had left them. He said, "Who's Ed Baxter?" He said it the way you say the name of someone who has accidentally been CC'd on an email chain. Mildly confused, mildly annoyed. He did not ask why a stranger had been at the hospital. He did not ask who had been there with me during surgery. He sat in the chair Ed had sat in all night, and he scrolled through his phone while he drank his coffee and told me about the end of the game he had watched, which his team had won, and how the guys at the party had gone absolutely crazy in the fourth quarter. He stayed for an hour and a half. He left because he had a fantasy football trade deadline to manage, and as he put it, real life doesn't stop. I lay in that hospital bed for a long time after he left. I looked at the daisies. I looked at the empty chair. I thought about 9 unanswered calls, and a man I had never met sitting in a plastic waiting room chair until 4 in the morning, because he had a daughter about my age and could not bring himself to leave. There is a specific kind of quiet that happens when you finally see something clearly that you have been looking at sideways for years. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It just arrives, and once it is there, you cannot make it leave. That quiet arrived in my hospital room at around noon on a Sunday, with a cup of gas station coffee and a fantasy football deadline and a husband who had not once, in the entire visit, asked whether I had been scared. I had been scared. I had been terrified. I had crawled across my kitchen floor and unlocked my own front door, and told a 911 dispatcher my name from a flat position on my entry rug. I had woken up alone in a cardiac ICU at 4 in the morning, and the first face I had seen belonging to someone who had chosen to stay was a 60-year-old contractor in a green fleece jacket who did not know my last name. Ed came back to visit twice while I was still admitted. The second time he brought his wife, a woman named Joellen who wore her gray hair in a braid and had the steady, unhurried presence of someone who has sat with a lot of people through a lot of things. She held my hand for a moment when she arrived, the way older women sometimes do, without preamble, like touch is a natural extension of saying hello. She said, "Ed told me about you. I'm glad you're still here." I told her I was glad too. She looked at me for a moment, really looked, the way people rarely do, and she said, "You're going to figure out exactly what your life needs to look like after this. Most people do. After something like this. It gets clearer." I found out later, through Sandra the nurse, that Ed had also filed a report with the hospital's patient advocacy coordinator. He had documented what he witnessed at the front desk, specifically that an immediate family member of an emergency cardiac patient had left the premises during active surgery after less than 2 hours of waiting. He had done it the morning after, quietly before he went home. He had not mentioned it to me. He had not wanted credit for it. He had just wanted there to be a record in case the shape of my marriage ever needed that record to exist somewhere. That is the kind of man Ed Baxter is. I am still recovering. The physical part is going better than the cardiologist expected. She said I am one of her more motivated patients, which I think is a polite way of saying I am stubborn in a medically useful direction. The other kind of recovering, the kind that has nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with it, is slower and harder, and I am not pretending otherwise. My husband and I are separated now. I did not make that decision in the hospital room. I made it over the following 6 weeks, slowly and quietly, the way I have come to understand I make most of my real decisions. Not with a dramatic gesture, but with a kind of gradual, undeniable clarity. 9 calls. Read receipts. A waiting room chair he sat in for less than 2 hours. A man he has never met sitting in that same chair all night because he could not bring himself to leave someone's daughter alone. The math of it was not complicated. I have had dinner with Ed and Joellen twice since I was discharged. They live 20 minutes from me. Joellen makes a pot roast that is genuinely one of the best things I have ever eaten, and Ed has strong opinions about the right way to refinish hardwood floors, which I now know because he spent 45 minutes explaining it to me over coffee, and I did not want him to stop. They have 3 kids and 4 grandchildren and a dog named Biscuit, who is, by any objective measure, the world's most confident beagle. They feel like family. Not in a sentimental, vague way. In the specific, practical, you can call me at 11 p.m. way that actually means something. The night before I was discharged, Sandra the nurse came in for her last shift before I left. She straightened the blanket at the foot of my bed in the way people do when they want to do something with their hands while they say something that matters. She said, "I've been doing this for 18 years. You would be surprised how many people are in rooms like this one alone. But you had someone." She paused. "He wasn't who you expected. But you had someone." I think about that a lot. I think about the version of that night where Ed Baxter walked past the front desk and out the automatic doors and went home to his wife. I think about the version where I woke up at 4:17 in the morning in a cardiac ICU, and the room was empty and there were no yellow daisies on the windowsill. I think about what it would have cost me, not financially, not even emotionally, but at the level of some quiet interior thing, to have woken up from surgery alone and stayed that way. I did not wake up alone. A stranger made sure of it. I used to believe that the people who were supposed to show up were the ones who would. That marriage and blood and years of history were the gravity that held people in place when the ground fell out from under you. What I know now is that gravity is not a title. It is not a ring on your finger or a name on an emergency contact form. It is a choice that gets made or not made at midnight in a hospital waiting room when a game comes on the television, and the exit is right there and nobody is watching. Ed Baxter made that choice for a stranger. He did not make a speech about it. He did not post about it or expect anything from it. He just stayed, and then he left quietly before I was awake, and he let yellow daisies speak for him instead. If you are listening to this today and you have been rearranging yourself to fit someone who is never going to stay, I want you to know something. The people who will sit in the hard chair in the hard room through the hard hours are out there. You may not know their names yet, you may not have met them, but they exist, and they are more real than the ones who leave when the game comes on. And sometimes what nearly ends your life is the very thing that finally shows you who was never actually in the room to begin with.